Hello, Dames. Today we are thrilled to have with us Dr. Fishy. Um, this is our first time doing a Facebook Live along with our Zoom link. So bear with me just for a little bit as I get my bearings. Dr. Fishy is the Vice President of and has a PhD in counselor education and supervision. She's a certified rehab counselor. She is a licensed associate counselor and a licensed professional counselor. And that one she just got, so we're super excited to add that to the list of her bio. And today she's going to talk to us about her doctoral dissertation, which was all about what role does disability play and how does parenting play a role in outcomes of people who have disabilities. And we met at a seminar, and when she spoke, I was like, oh my God. I'm like, Gabby, I need your thesis. I need to read this thesis because this is like the crux of what we want to do at Dames, is to help parents adjust how they're parenting their children so that they can have better outcomes for their children. And I read the whole thing top to bottom. I highlighted everything. I was in an airplane reading it and I was like, yes, oh my God, I love this line. I was sharing it with my husband. People on the plane thought I was a little crazy, but I just absolutely fell in love with her work and what she is trying to do here within our community. So Gabby, thank you so much for being a part of Dames and for being here today to share your work with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. This is what I love to do. And it's been my passion for a really long time, specifically to help parents whose children have disabilities, because I think we need to up the support, right? We need to create more of a community, and we need to make sure that families have access to the resources they need. So Michelle's going to be kind enough to go through the slides for me because we were having some technical difficulties this morning, but we're going to work through them. So if you want to just go to the first slide, I think it just gives me room for an intro and kind of giving everybody a background on myself. So as Michelle so nicely said, I have my PhD in rehab and mental health, and it's been my passion ever since going through that program to take those skills and bring it to the disability community and to families like yours. And so what brought me to this specific topic? I've studied parenting and disability since the beginning of my master's program. So it's been almost 10 years. And I became really interested in this topic because I realized that the way I was raised as a disabled person was not the norm or wasn't the typical way of doing things. Just a little bit of background because we could spend the whole hour on this, but I won't. I am one of 6 kids. I was born with cerebral palsy, and my twin sister and I were my mom's first 2 kids. So her motto was always, I don't know how to raise a kid with a disability, so I'm just going to raise a kid and see how the rest turns out. And I think that mindset really set up me for the rest of my life before we even knew it, right? She set the same expectations for me as she did any of my other siblings. And she made sure that I had access to all typical experiences, and she treated me the same as she did my twin sister and anybody else. So that brought me to, why are there so many differences in parenting when you get a disability diagnosis, and what can we do to kind of shift the focus from disability being a medical diagnosis to disability being part of who your child is and being a positive thing to help define what they're going to do with their life. So that's kind of my feel about how this became a passion of mine. And this particular study I did as my dissertation thesis that I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about today. And it was for me to really understand from the parenting perspective where these differences were coming from. I had a lot of experience as a disabled woman myself, but not having been a parent, I really wanted their perspective on what was helping them make decisions, where were they getting their information, and why the shift to be more overprotecting if your child had a disability was there. Because a lot of the research before I started this study, that was already proven, right? That research already says if your child has a disability, we tend to be more overprotective. So I was like, okay, we know that this is there, but why? And so that's when I structured what's called a qualitative study, and that let me really talk to parents and get their experiences firsthand. And it gave me a lot of really great information that I want to share with you all, and kind of what came out of it and what we can do to help. You can go to the next slide. This slide I put in here because I wanted to give you guys an idea of where we are right now when we think parenting and disability. And this sort of word cloud was created when I did a simple Google search on parenting and disability. And I created this word cloud out of the most popular words to be generated from that search. So that's what you're looking at on your screen here. And as you can see, not a lot of the words are positive, right? We've got exhausted, we've got tired, we've got hard, we've got struggling, we've got survival, we've got fight, hopes in there too. But I think this just gives a general idea of where we're coming at this perspective, right? When your child receives a disability diagnosis, the information being put out there, unfortunately, is not very positive, and it's not guiding you in the direction of sort of promoting independence, if you will. So, oh, go ahead, Michelle. You're all right. You're reading it pretty well. So this is just to give you guys an overview of what my study found, and then we'll go into some examples and then how it relates to your life and your kids' life. So what are the main factors or differences that the parents in my study identified when parenting their disabled child? Protection was definitely number one, wanting to keep kids safe. Medical influence came up a lot. So when you receive a disability diagnosis, it's common and makes sense to sort of go with what doctors are telling you because you're not familiar with the diagnosis yourself. Disability mindset. So parents telling me that if they had or had not had exposure to disability before their child, that made a big difference. When they have discussions around disability rehab and therapy and things like that, from day one, if your child is born with a disability, it focuses mostly on physical improvement. So I'll use myself as an example here because I don't know all of your kids for the people joining us, but when I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at 10 months old, it was, don't expect too much from her, right? She's probably never going to walk, she's never going to talk, she's never going to accomplish very much, but we can, make her comfortable, right? So then physical rehab comes into play because it's how can we make her walk better? How can we make her legs straighter? How can we make her stronger? And quite frankly, how can we make the disability less obvious as possible? Right? How can we make her blend in? And what we call in the disability community now, how can we help her pass? Right? As a non-disabled person or as the least disabled person possible. And that's really what the focus was on. And then it's finding an appropriate balance between protection and making sure your child has what they need and independence. So when we're considering disability, this seems to come up a lot more because as we are thinking about what their developmental milestones are going to be and what they're going to be able to do, we're not quite sure what role the disability plays. And so the focus tends to become give them more help and support because that's what their disability warrants before we even know what they themselves are capable of doing. You can go to the next one. So these are just some examples that I wanted to pull out. Like Michelle said, there is an entire thesis out there, cover to cover. It's about 130 pages. So this is me trying to give you guys just a really brief overview. And then if anybody's interested or wants to learn more, we'll have a couple avenues at the end of the webinar for you guys to do that. But I just wanted to give you a snapshot because I think what's most important today is that we get to sort of what this means for you and next steps for you and your kids. So as I said, desire to protect came up as a pretty much the main theme throughout my dissertation, and why they were identifying to me that their parenting styles shifted a little bit towards their disabled child, right? Parents worry that a child's disability is going to have negative consequences, and it's going to negatively influence their everyday lives, their social interactions, etc. So they want to protect them as parents, make sure they're safe. And Michelle, if you wouldn't mind just reading one or two of the quotes, my phone cuts off some of the text, so I can't see it all. Again, technological issues. But if you want to just read one or two of them just to give us an idea.
No problem. So the first one says, I want to protect him as a parent. That's what any parent wants for their child, especially when their child has a disability, because they're very gullible. I don't know if that's the right word. They're easy prey because they want to be very understanding and very giving, and people use them for that. I'll just read them all. The second one is, I have a fear of her getting hurt, and she's very gullible. She knows that she's gullible, and she's easily swayed by people that she believes their stories and can be taken in, and she knows that, so we're careful. And then the last one says, because I think she's been so protected, she's always had adults around her, she's never been exposed to the lies that people will tell to get their way. She's never really learned how to be savvy.
And I think this brings up a really good point. I just want to say before we go any further, and I was talking to Michelle about this earlier, this is not meant to point fingers at anyone, right? We're not here saying anybody's perspective or experience is wrong. We are here to shed light on the situation and to give you guys resources to help encourage that independence. So I think the theme throughout some of these quotes about protection really goes back to, because they're so protected and not exposed, then you actually have to end up worrying more as they age, right? And so that protection kind of creates what I call like the protective bubble, right? And then we're so nervous for anybody to pop it that they're not actually given chances to have all of those full experiences and grow and, quite frankly, learn from their mistakes, which we'll get into a little bit later. And then the next one, medical influence was also a really big one. This basically goes back to information given by medical providers and how that can have a negative connotation sometimes. And what that means, you guys heard from my experience alone that when a doctor is telling you not to expect much, the expectations you have in your mind are going to be automatically lower before even knowing what your child can do. Michelle, do you want to read that one?
Yes. My biggest fear was probably not being able to fulfill everything. I mean, all her needs, or getting all especially the medical attention that she needed. She was fragile. It was so scary because I thought, how am I going to go home or wherever I was going with her? I was afraid because you see her in the hospital and she has all these tubes, the IVs, and everybody's seeing her, and it's very overwhelming.
So they're quick to present sort of the overwhelming information and everything you need to do from a medical perspective, but you're not given the support necessarily to help them thrive. And just so everybody knows, as we're reading these quotes, I realize they're probably should have specified these are all parents of children with disabilities from the Tucson community. That's where I'm from, and their identities are being protected because they were nice enough to be very open with me in these interviews, and I wanted to include these just to show you guys that you're not alone, right? That this is what parents are going through, and this is where my passion comes from to help you all. So I'm going to go ahead to the next one. Expectations was another really big sort of theme that came out of the interviews. So as their child got older and they had more of an idea of the challenges that the child was going to face, parental anticipations or expectations kind of shifted. So if parents were seeing failure to meet certain milestones, they wanted their expectations to be what they called more realistic. And that was anything from dating, education, career, etc. I think the takeaway from this is just because your child might not be hitting certain milestones the same way as some of their peers or their siblings doesn't mean that they can't achieve them. And that was where the lack of resources and support really came in. So we can go ahead to the next one. Assistance versus independence. I think this is kind of the crux of the whole thing, if that makes sense. But parents really identified a struggle with when to push and when to assist. And I think that comes from, I heard a lot of parents say to me, and my own parents have said this to me, the disability experience seemed hard enough as it was. And so pushing you or pushing them seemed almost unfair, right? Because they were already coming up against a lot of obstacles, and out of love and concern, we want to make it easier. Right. Michelle, you want to go ahead and read that quote too?
Yeah, how much do I push? How much should I push? Am I making the right decision to not be on him as closely as I was? Those are very hard choices to make. When do I push versus when do I let him handle it?
And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that those of you watching have probably had the same internal struggle, and I think that's why it's so important to talk about it. And we'll get to my perspective on it and the takeaways at the end, but I think just again to show you guys, this isn't a unilateral difficulty, right? This is a difficulty faced by most parents in the community, and so we should be talking about it and we should be supporting each other. We can go to the next one. All right, so what did parents recommend for other parents? What did they identify that was already working for them, and what did they say to me that they think other parents should be on the lookout for themselves? Mentors was the most popular suggestion. Having somebody that's already been through it and having somebody you can talk to, that's what we're trying to create here at Danes, right? Really that community, that support, being advocates. I think from a very early age, the need to advocate for your child's needs is really prevalent. Because unfortunately, if we're being honest, we're in a society that's not really set up for them or their needs. And that's just the reality. And so really advocating and knowing what you're entitled to, knowing what's out there for your child to help them succeed is super important. Finding balance. And it's funny how much of this really relates to what we do at Danes as well, because I think that's the whole crux of what we try to do is help families find that balance and that support. And then finding resources. So what's out there? What should I be looking at? Who should I be talking to? In the last few years, I've been fortunate enough to work with more of the disability community, and all of the families that I work with just say we want to know where we should be looking, where we should be going, what we should be prioritizing. And when the conversation again is so physically centered, right, on your child's physical needs, we forget sometimes to look for those resources for their life in general. Oh, and then there's a quote at the bottom of that one too. I think that's just about the importance of mentoring.
Okay, so like a mentor, a peer-to-peer, there is mentoring programs now and through pilot parents. Actually, they have the parents that are available. Of course, you do not know that, and they are only available to screen babies after they are born, not when they are pregnant or being born.
So I think that quote speaks to she's really looking for the support kind of across the lifespan, you know, and a lot of times you'll get a diagnosis and then they're like, okay, good luck. Nice to see you. Right. So really having that person you can go to, a person that knows the experience is super important. Okay, so here's where we got into the real meat of sort of what does all of this mean and what can we do with it? So independence is ideal, right? I think, or I presume for most of the parents that I've worked with, it's not that we don't want our children to be independent and live full, well-rounded life, right? The process of achieving that independence, however, can be daunting, right? How do I do it? Where do I go? What's available? What's out there? So independence becomes a future goal, but there's not always like a concrete plan of that would be great, but how do I get there? And then another big takeaway message that came out of all of this was that socialization and everything you need to consider in regard to social activity. So just a little bit on this to expand. I think a lot of kids learn from social interaction, right? They learn from their peers. They learn from making mistakes. They learn from watching somebody else do it. So then if a child with a disability is put at a disadvantage for not having as many social opportunities, they're in turn not having as many opportunities to sort of learn from their peers, or you don't get as many trial and error sort of opportunities. And this speaks to, I guess, my biggest takeaway of as wonderful a job as my mother did, what was missing from my childhood, which was really being a part of the disability community. Learning from the get-go to embrace who I was instead of constantly trying to fix it. And that's not to say, right, that if your child is in pain or there's an assistive device or something that's going to help them not to use it. That's not what I'm here to say. I think the general message is don't be so focused on the outcomes of the disability itself and more about your child and what it means for their life and what you want their life to look like. So how do we encourage that independence? Right, Gabby, great. So you want them to be more independent, but what does that mean? And how do we do that? One of the biggest points that came out of my dissertation, and Michelle and I talk about this one a lot, is how happiness is defined differently with a disability versus without a disability. And I just want to let that sink in for a second because the initial reaction is probably like, what? But of every parent I've interviewed and every parent I've worked with one-on-one since, without fail, every single one of them has said to me, I just want my child to be happy. That's what I want for them, which I fully understand and support. But then as we get further in the conversation, I realize that happiness for their disabled child suddenly means something different in their head. And I think the easiest way for me to make that distinction is that what they mean by happiness is actually they want their child to be content, right? So if we are looking outside the realm of disability, what does happiness mean? Happiness means growing up and interacting with your peers. It means going to different outings, experiencing different things. It means going to college. It means getting a job that you can support yourself and that you can grow in and be happy. And it means dating. And it means meeting someone to share your life with. And it means all of these things. And it's not to say that that's easy. Okay. Nobody said the road to that is smooth sailing for anybody. But when you're talking about your disabled child, it's suddenly, well, they're not going to be able to do those things, but at least they're happy. And so my challenge to that is, are they really? If that's how we're defining happiness, are they truly happy? Or are they just content? And I know it might take a while for that to sink in, but I think sort of that helped me understand where there needs to be more of a desire to push. Because even though the pushing is hard, it's going to get them a lot of those things that I just listed that, from a psychological standpoint, make up true happiness. When expectations are key, letting them try. This is my biggest message to any parent. I say this in every talk I've ever given. You don't know what your child's capable of if you never give them the chance to do it. So if we've already decided, oh, this disability or this difficulty already means they're not going to do X, Y, and Z, we've set it up that they're not even going to try to do X, Y, and Z. Right? And so the analogy I like to use for this is, if you set the bar of expectation where you think it should be based on their disability and what we think about it, you pick a spot and you're like, okay, if they get to this, I'll be really happy. In reality, they're only going to go as high as you set that bar. So why not set it a little bit higher? And if they fall a little bit short, that's still higher than where we thought it should be in the first place. And if they don't, isn't that 10 times better? Because they've just done things that for a second we put out of the realm of possibility. Right? And then dignity of risk. This is my favorite saying. This is my favorite independent living principle. I could go on and on about the independent living perspective, coming to you in another webinar sometime soon. But basically what independent living means in a nutshell is that the person with a disability is in control of his or her own life. They're making decisions, they're in the driver's seat. And society is responsible for providing the supports for helping them get there. And so within the independent living movement, one of their core principles is called dignity of risk. And this basically means that disabled people have the same right to take chances, take a risk, and fail as anybody else. We tend to have this narrative, and I've seen it mostly with parents and caregivers, where the goal, whether we realize it or not, is actually avoiding failure. Right? If I help them, if I just make this easier, if they don't fail, then they're not going to be disappointed. They're not going to be upset, and they're not going to come up against another hardship. But in reality, what we're doing is we're taking away the opportunity to learn from those failures. Right? If I try something and it doesn't work, I know what doesn't work and I can try again. Right? Whereas if somebody is constantly there doing it for me, I don't know what's going to work and what's not. And so if I can take that risk, and fail, then I can learn from it. And then the flip side to that is, what if I take that risk and I succeed? Right? So if, for example, you have a ton of support for somebody and they set a goal and they reach it, but on the flip side of that coin, they were given the opportunity to try it themselves, who takes responsibility for that success? If I did it with a ton of support and help and I wasn't the one driving the decision, is it really my success or is it somebody else's? Whereas if I do it on my own and I succeed, I get to be proud, right? I get to be like, I did this. I made that happen. I'll just give you guys a really small example. I was working with a woman just a week ago, and her daughter, she's around 12, and our disabilities happen to present pretty similarly. And I asked the question, I said, is she dressing herself? And she was like, well, no, that would take way too long. And, we got places to go and people to see, and, it would take her forever. And I said, well, I hear you. I said, and, when I was first learning to dress myself, the first time I ever did it head to toe took me 4 hours. 4 hours. And I was upstairs in my parents' house. I had just come off of a camp where they were all like, be independent, do it on your own. But they had taught me in like sections, right? Like, this is how you put on your shoes, this is how you can do this and this and this. And I had never really like put it all together. And so the first time I was trying to put it all together, it took me a very long time. And I'm sure if you asked my mother, she wanted to come up there so many times and be like, can I just help you? And it took me at that point to say, I don't want the help. But she had raised me to know that I could figure it out on my own. So that I was able to say, no, it's okay, I don't want the help. And so that first time took me 4 hours, and now I get dressed in 15 minutes. Well, I mean, if I'm being honest, it depends on the weather outside and whether I need to put on pants. Then maybe it takes me a little longer, which is another reason I live in sunny Arizona. But in general, it doesn't take me anywhere near 4 hours anymore. Right? So even though these things seem daunting, if we're giving them the skills and the tools, chances are they can figure it out and they can take that risk. I'm going to go to the next one. All right. So how can you take everything I'm saying and turn it into taking action? First and foremost, seek education and emotional support. Educate yourselves, know what's out there. And this is coming from a therapist, so you can take it with a grain of salt if you want, but find people to talk to, right? Whether it's peers that are going through the same thing, if it's a therapist because the experience has taken a toll on your mental health, that's okay too. That's a lot of who I get to see now and really help and support. But find that emotional support. It's okay to say, I don't know if I'm doing all of this right and I'm a little overwhelmed and I just need some help. And there are more and more resources out there to do that. So I encourage you all to take advantage of them. Learn from the disability community. First and foremost in this, we need to learn to trust disabled voices. You ever notice that all of your kids' providers and all of your kids' therapists, none of them are disabled? That's not taking away from the wonderful work that they do, because I would not be where I am without my therapists, who some of them are now my really good friends, but they will never be able to speak to the disability experience. So we need to learn from disabled voices, pick up disabled voices, and give people the platform. Embrace the independent living perspective. I talked about this a little bit, and we'll be getting into it more through Danes as well, but really letting the person with a disability be in control. And I know some of you have young kids, so what does control look like? In those very early stages, it looks like explaining things to them, not just assuming that they have to go to PT or OT or speech and not know what's happening or what's going on, right? Making them involved in the process. And this is a personal choice, but just in my personal and professional opinion, explaining their disability, letting them know what's going on and not trying to hide it or trying to make it less than what it is. Because if we do that from a young age, we're teaching them that there's something wrong with it. And we're not doing that intentionally. Like I said in the beginning, I'm not here to say that anybody's doing anything wrong. I'm here to shed light on it, right? And so if they know from an early age what their disability is and what that means for them, and that they're part of the largest minority in the world, right? Then we can make it not such an isolating experience and maybe build some disability pride from the beginning. And then helping your child embrace that experience. Look, they are going to go through things, and certain things are going to be harder because they have a disability. Nobody's sugarcoating that here, but if they can embrace it and learn that they can advocate for themselves, you're building a skill set that most people, by the time they reach early adulthood, aren't going to have, right? I mean, my mom and I joke now that it's just my really hard head, but in reality, it's an advocate is who she raised. She raised an advocate, not just for myself, but for other people and for when I see things that aren't right. I've learned to speak up, and I've learned to say this needs to be done differently and we need to include everybody. So really helping them embrace that experience. And I know a lot of this is like very broad spectrum and it's a lot of information. Hopefully we're just kind of starting the conversation. I do want to say though, because I've caught myself doing it a few times and it might be new to some of you on here, and I intended to start with this and then just got too excited. But I am saying disabled person, and I'm calling myself a disabled person and a disabled woman. And I just want to clarify the difference real quick. That's identity first language. I'm putting my identity first. I'm sure most of you have heard about person first language, and I'm really happy that we're making that shift in the community, because I think there is a tendency to see disability before the person from a perspective that disability is negative, right? And so we don't want that. But identity first language is a shift to where I'm embracing disability as part of who I am. Just like I'm a woman, just like I'm Italian, just like I'm a bunch of other things, I am disabled. And I don't think that word should come with a negative connotation. Because as long as it does, we're seeing our needs as separate, or our needs as something that puts us below others in society, and that's not the case. So yes, it's a part of me, it's a part of who I am. I encourage families to make that shift from looking at it as a medical diagnosis to really looking at it as part of the person. Because in reality, it's afforded me so many opportunities that I never would have had otherwise. And here's the big one that everybody looks at me sideways, but if I was given the chance tomorrow, I wouldn't change it. It's me, it's my life, it's who I am. And I like my life. I have a pretty good one. You know, some days are a little more challenging than others, but that's everybody.
Gabby, we're almost at the end of our time, but I really want you to maybe talk a little bit about the different things we're going to do within DAMES, because we launched the charity website yesterday, and you and I talked about kind of creating almost a whole other section that helps parents on a path towards independence. Do you want to summarize? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but do you want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do and how we're going to try to help parents so they have resources?
Sure, yeah. So, as Michelle said, we're actually going to make it its whole own section, and we really talked about how do we help parents encourage independence? What resources can we put in there? How do we make this more attainable? And so we're going to do some cool things around what resources are already there, and then we're also creating some of our own resources based on our experience. And I think our app is really exciting. It's in the works. It's not developed yet, but for those of you that have typically developing children as well as disabled children, you probably know that there are lots of ways to track your child's milestones, right? People have made them apps. People go to the doctors and they do it, and like where they quote should be at certain ages. And none of those resources were considering disability and what role that plays. So we have a really exciting opportunity to offer that as a resource and kind of break down these different milestones, like dressing yourself, for example, and attach disability resources and tactics to them to help make them more attainable for families and your kids. So I'm really excited about that. And then we'll be doing more about the independent living perspective and what that looks like. So we're going to elaborate on that for you guys. And I started working in independent living, like 7 or 8 years ago now, and it changed my perspective as a disabled person. So I'm really excited to be able to bring it to more people and more families.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm really excited about that. And I know we're talking to the board about it. Some of our board members who have children who have disabilities, they were like, yes, that's what we need. We need like just help, because it is harder for our children to reach some of those developmental milestones, but it doesn't mean that they can't. It just means they need a different way, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Gabby. And I really appreciate you taking the time to go through your work, because when I read it, I'm such a nerd. When because I did, read the whole thing cover to cover, and I just absolutely loved what came out of it. And it's really going to guide how we fashion dames in the future and the kind of programs that we create. So thank you so much for all of your work and everything that you do. I think what you do is absolutely life-changing, and I just really appreciate you totally in all.
No, thank you. I appreciate you. You know how much I appreciate James, because it's needed, and we need to put this out there. Of all the people that I work with, they constantly ask, like, where can I go? You're saying I need more help and more support, but where can I get it? And James really provides that. So just really excited to be a part of it and help where I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I'm excited about the webinars we're going to do in the future.
Me too.
All right. Thank you.